After years of development and education, WCM's Watco division created an innovative new market with its bathtub, overflow, and waste assembly. WCM obtained patents on that due to its inventive nature. IPS, the defendant in this case, competes directly with WCM, and it competes directly with WCM's bath, waste, and overflow assembly. We will present evidence that WCM patents have been directly and indirectly infringed by IPS, and that infringement is willful. The evidence will show that for the harm that IPS has caused WCM, that WCM should be compensated. Good morning, members of the jury. My name is Stan Gibson, and I represent WCM Industries and its Watco division. With me presenting the case will be Mr. Walsworth and Mr. Reed. We'll be helped with technical assistance by Mr. Wynn. And as our first witness, you'll hear from Mr. Kevin Fink, who is our corporate representative and the vice president and CFO of WCM. As I mentioned, WCM obtained patents. This is one of those patents from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. We'll present evidence during this case that those patents are infringed by IPS's products. These come in what are called full kits, and that would be what we're looking at here, which means it has this additional piping. It can also be sold in what's called a half kit, where it just has the bathtub overflow assembly and the drain and the trim. That would be called a half kit. And we'll be talking about that in a little bit more detail. But this was the innovative product that Mr. Ball came up with. And I want to talk a little bit about what he had to experience in order to do that. Although these assemblies are not expensive, they can cause a lot of problems if they're not done right or if they leak. And what was in the field or in the plumbing area before Mr. Ball came along with his invention was what are called one-hole bathtub overflow assemblies. And that's where it's called a one-hole because it has a screw right in the middle of this faceplate. And there were also assemblies that were called two holes. And that's what you're looking at here. They're called two holes because there's two screws that hold this overflow plate in place. Mr. Ball is going to explain that the problem with these is that we don't have a bathtub here, but there would be a bathtub that would go out in this direction. And when you're trying to work on this, there's usually a wall where the pipes are. And it would take, because there's a wall here, one plumber would have to be behind the wall where the bathtub is, and another plumber would have to be in the front trying to put these screws in. And this could cause misalignment. There wouldn't be a 360-degree seal, and there could be leaks. And the problem is, when there's leaks, they may be small leaks, but over time, they do a lot of damage. Because those small leaks can lead to mold and mildew, or if they grow into larger leaks, you have a situation where you may have stains in your wall, you can have damage to the woodwork in the house. So even though this is not an expensive device, an assembly, it can lead to problems if it's not installed properly that can cost thousands of dollars. And unlike a car that you can go take into a mechanic, well, a bathtub, it's in your house, you're going to have to call a plumber. The plumber's going to have to come in, and that's going to have to be fixed there. So he's going to explain that he was aware of these different problems in the 1990s. And that when he started to try to think of ways this could be done better, he had to pay attention to every little detail. Because in this type of situation where you could have leaks that are hard to see at first, but can cause major damage with mold and mildew, you have to pay attention to every detail. And he started, we have a timeline over to your left. He started really in October of 1999. He conceived of what became the Innovator. And this process took nearly 2 years from the conception until he had a product that could be launched by WCM in the market. And Mr. Ball is going to explain this in a lot more detail than I will. But you'll see that when you look at the faceplate where the overflow is, there are no screws. So compared to the 1 hole and the 2 hole where there were screws that went through the faceplate, he came up with a way that there were no screws. He also made it so that this piece could detach if someone wanted to. It would stay on when the plumber was done installing it, but if you wanted to remove it, it could be easily removed. And that was important because if someone has a clog in their drain, you can easily have a plumber come in and pop this cap off and clear the drain, rather than having to go through this whole assembly and reassembly process that you'd have with the 1 hole and the 2 hole screws. And what he did in coming up with that is he designed, and we're going to be talking about different pieces of these plumbing products. He designed an overflow assembly, and obviously this is the part in the bathtub where if the bath water gets too high, it'll go through this drain. But he came up with the idea that he'd have a threaded piece that would go through the bathtub wall, and this plaque that we have here is meant to stand in for the bathtub wall. And it would go through the bathtub wall, and then one plumber could assemble it instead of 2, because the plumber could put it through the bathtub wall, walk around, and take this nut element and screw it on to the threads, and it would hold the washer behind the tub in place against the bathtub wall, and it took much, much less time. And it resulted in a 360-degree seal. You didn't have the slippage that you could have with the 1 hole and the 2 hole that Mr. Ball will explain. And then to finish it, the plumber could just come along and put the cap on. And he'll go through and explain why that was much simpler. And although once you have the finished product, it looks easy to do, it took Mr. Ball nearly 2 years to do that. And I'll explain that the way this comes on and off is someone can put their finger through the overflow hole and pull it off as it was designed. One of the important things that Mr. Ball also came up with is he came up with a unique thread pattern for this overflow portion, which we'll call an upper end portion, that comes through the bathtub wall. It doesn't allow cross-threading. This is not a standard pattern in the industry. It's something he came up with. And cross-threading, if you think of putting on a cap on a bottle of water, you can force that cap on and put it on, and it looks like it's on, but it's not on all the threads. And if you happen to turn that bottle of water over when you do that, it's going to leak. Well, he made sure that the thread pattern that he came up with, you couldn't cross-thread. I can't put it on like that. It has to go on only one way. And that made sure there wouldn't be leaks. And that was one of the other parts of the Innovator that he came up with. And the Innovator then had Mr. Ball explained, the first patent application that pertained to the Innovator was filed in June of 2000. And then in August of 2001, the first was sold. He came up with another kind of Innovator. And this is called a flex Innovator because it has a flexible piping on it. And this allows someone, if they can't quite fit a straight pipe, because those can be difficult depending on where the piping is in the house, this allows someone to be able to bend it and twist it so that you don't have to put together a lot of different pieces of PVC or different kinds of metal piping to reach the drain and have it go to the overflow. And this was something else, and he came out with, this one was introduced by WCM in 2006. There was another part that was introduced by WCM, and that was called what's called a rough-in kit. And a rough-in meant that a plumber could install it without the finish, without the stopper and the finish, and also without this piece. And you'd wonder why a plumber would do that. Well, in new construction, the bathtub gets used kind of as the trash bin. And these pieces, these finished pieces, can get scratched. And so it makes sense for plumbers to install them in a rough-in format, where you have the finished pieces left out, and then a plumber can add the finished pieces later. And that was something else that WCM came out with. In conclusion, at the end of the case, we will ask you to find that WCM's patents are infringed, that the patents are valid, and that a reasonable royalty to compensate WCM for the harm is between $1.50 and $1.90. We will also ask that IPS be found to be a willful infringer. A willful infringer because we will present evidence that it copied WCM's Innovator product. Thank you, members of the jury, for your time and attention. Thank you, Your Honor.